Hello, friends, and welcome to day 18 of our Chronological Bible reading, part 2. Today we're in Genesis chapters 20 and 21. And if you're just joining me, I'm Kenny Cargill. I'm a bivocational pastor in East Texas. And I make these videos simply to try to encourage you and to hold myself accountable for thinking a little more deeply about the Scripture. Because if I'm going to say anything to you, I have to have read it and thought about it. So sometimes I'm a day behind on the year. Today's actually January 19th, and I'm doing this is 18 part 2. And so, but anyway, I hope you get something out of this. So in chapter 20 and 21 is what we're in. There's a couple of stories here, and I'm going to kind of summarize what's going on here, and then I'm going to come back and bring out the things that I'm getting from these passages and some things that I hope will be a blessing to you as you read the passages as well. So chapter 20 is the story of Abraham and Abimelech. Now, Abimelech was a local king from around where Abraham was living, and Abraham, just like he did when he was in Egypt, he was afraid of the king. You know, remember when he was in Egypt, he was afraid the Pharaoh would would kill him and take his wife, Sarai, and sure enough, he gets there. Pharaoh finds her beautiful, takes her into his harem, and then God brings some discipline on Pharaoh's household. He releases Sarah when he realizes what's going on and asks asks Abraham to pray for him, and Abraham does, and it's all as well. So now we're in another situation. We're down the road a few years. Abraham is there around Abimelech. He does exactly the same thing because he's afraid that Abimelech is going to kill him and take Sarah for his wife. Because apparently Sarah was killing it. She's an old lady at this point, and yet these kings want to have her as a wife. There also is a possibility there's some social things going on here with prosperous people and trading families to create alliances. That happened a lot. It happened all over the Western world with kings and things like that. But there could be some of that going on. But in this story, Abimelech releases Sarah and all as well. And we'll get to some of the things I think is going on here in just a minute. And then in chapter 21, we have the birth of Isaac. The promised son comes. Sarah has become pregnant, and she has this baby that's a baby of the promise that we heard about in chapter 12, and that was repeated in 13 and in 15 of Genesis, that Abraham would be the father of many nations and many people. He had to have that first son to get that started, which happened. We also have this very unfortunate story about Hagar and Ishmael. So Sarah has Isaac, and everybody loves him. She's all excited. She's laughing in joy. She's joyful. She finally has this child, her only child. And then she gets jealous of Hagar again. So here's Ishmael, this Ishmael who has Abraham's attention, who's now a teenager probably, and he's got Abraham's attention. He's been living in Abraham's household, and so Sarah is jealous, and so this rivalry kind of kicks up between Sarah and Hagar. Can you imagine that? People are people. This is the same kind of thing that would happen today. So the rivalry comes around, but Sarah has Abraham's heart and his commitment, and so she says, hey, I need you to send these people off. Abraham actually goes to God and says, God, what do you want me to do? God says, do as Sarah requests. So he sends off Hagar and Ishmael off into the wilderness with a little bit of food and water. When it all runs out, and Ishmael looks like he's going to die, Hagar lays him under a bush and walks away and waits for him to die. And in that moment, God appears to her and tells her he sees her, that he sees her problem, that they will survive, and that she will make a great nation out of Ishmael because he is Abraham's son. Now, this is important because this is where a lot of scholars believe that Muslims come from, like Muhammad specifically tracks his heritage back to Ishmael. And so we see this come to fruition in the future. And then there's a treaty in here as well at the end. But here's the things that I want us to see, that I think we can see. First of all, we once again have evidence that the Scripture records what people do, not necessarily what we should do. Now, this is important because what you've got going on here is the Bible is revealing to us who Abraham is and who God is by describing their interactions. As anybody who's come to Christ knows, you're not a great Christian when you first come to Christ. You have a lot to learn. You've got to grow in the Scripture. God's got refining to do in your life. And at this time, what we're seeing is God revealing to Abraham who he is through his own mistakes. And then God's revealing, and others revealing to Abraham who Abraham is through his mistakes. And he's revealing himself to Abraham and to all of us by how he deals with Abraham graciously, mercifully, with lots of forgiveness, and by keeping his promises that he made to Abraham. We see this all throughout. God was gracious to Abraham in spite of his causing problems for Abimelech here in the first chapter. God also, I think, protected Sarah because this was to be a line of people. If Sarah became pregnant by someone else, then God would not have been the one in control, but he was the one in control, and therefore he kept Sarah safe from becoming pregnant by another man other than Abraham. And so Isaac comes. We see the promise fulfilled through that, and then we have the story of Hagar and Ishmael, where we see that God keeps his promises. He had promised that Abraham's descendants would be great, and though Ishmael wasn't the son of the promise, like Isaac was, because he wasn't the son of Abraham and Sarah, God still took care of him. And let me tell you what, as a child who grew up as a stepchild, whose father was absentee until I was about 40, I can tell you, knowing that God cares about the leftovers and the left behinds and the not enoughs and the other thans and those kinds of people, or at least those of us who identify as those kinds of people at points in our lives, that's a great comfort. So I hope some of these thoughts are encouraging to you. Ponder this, read these things, and keep going into Scripture. If you haven't started yet and you've just come across this video, jump in right here. Jump in on day 18 or jump in on day 19 tomorrow and start in Genesis chapter 22 and just read through. And when you get to the end of Revelation in a year, then just read from Genesis chapter 1 through 22. Don't stop. Get it done, and it will change your life. Thank you for joining me today, and you be blessed. Love you guys.